Hello, good morning. Today our guest is Professor Eugenio Proto. Hello, Eugenio. How are you doing?
I'm okay, Lipton. You?
I'm great, Eugenio, and today we're going to talk about happiness. So you have produced several fascinating articles. One is titled National Happiness and Genetic Distance, a Cautious Exploration. The other is titled Life Satisfaction, Income and Personality. And then the last one was Brexit caused by the unhappy and the old. But before we delve into your articles, Eugenio, we're going to talk a little about happiness. Eugenio, why should we care about happiness in the first place?
Well, there are two reasons why we should care. Let's say we can roughly say there are two main reasons. If you're an economist, you should care about happiness. The first is that it's a way to measure well-being. Okay, so at the end, what an economist would like is to see that the economy produce well-being. Okay, that's the first reason. The second reason is because happiness per se is an important input that affects our behavior. It affects our productivity, it affects our voting behavior, it affects a lot of aspects which are economically relevant.
All right then, Eugenio. But I've always referred to myself as a deontological nihilist in the sense that I am passionate about living and life, but not necessarily the essence of happiness. So, for example, one may accumulate a great deal in life. You may even be an excellent friend, but eventually you will die and be forgotten. And even if you are an exceptional person, people may not appreciate your value. So I don't waste time trying to be happy. I focus on achieving my goals. So, for example, I love having intellectual discussions, and the quality of discussions on YouTube is subpar. That's why I started this show. So, unlike other people who care about chasing money and fame, I am more interested in investing in productivity, hence the word deontological. I am duty based. So, one has duty to his family, to his colleagues, etc. I have a duty to my audience and a duty to people like yourself to be respectful and knowledgeable. But I am not big on the concept of happiness. I think it's silly.
No, it's a very complicated and complex point when you raise, and obviously is well taken. First of all, people who study happiness, they always make this distinction between hedonic happiness and eudaimonic happiness. The hedonic happiness is the one they just say, good feeling. And eudaimonic happiness is sense of purpose. That is probably the one closest to the one you were referring before. Eudaimonic happiness is the sense of fulfilling your sense of purpose. And this is a different way of measuring happiness. Now, I want to say that the two concepts are not that different. If you think that even eudaimonic happiness can be affected by eudaimonic happiness, the fact that you know you're doing something good for you for the next generation or fulfill your generates you a sense of happiness. So it's not all is not everything that put you a good feeling straight away in the short run that affect your hedonic happiness. Even this sense of being useful can have a feedback on your hedonic happiness.
The sense of
You know,
being what beautiful
the sense of being fulfill your purpose. Okay.
or being dutiful. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, uh,
That's
uh,
called eudaimonic happiness. Yeah, and it's a
well,
different. Yeah, but they are very the two concepts of eudaimonic happiness, eudaimonic happiness are connected, are strictly connected.
Well, I'm happy that you mentioned the Greeks because the concept of the good life is resurging again in public debate. And as a student of philosophy, is an area that has piqued my interest. However, do you think that it's time we jettison the good life? Look, hedonism has been exaggerated. As someone who I'm sure reads philosophy in his spare time, I well, and I have also too. The hedonism is not necessarily the intention to only seek pleasure. That's an exaggeration, somewhat of a myth. Pleasure must be valuable according to the original hedonist. So if one is hedonistic, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's pleasure hungry or silly or engaging in dubious endeavors. So, for example, creating value can make one pleasurable. Therefore, I'm hedonistic because I enjoy creating value. I like to build great companies. I like to write books, and I derive pleasure from all of these activities. Hence, it's hedonistic, but doesn't mean that I'm only seeking pleasure.
Yeah, this is exactly what I'm saying. Eudaimonic happiness can fit back in the eudaimonic happiness, and the two things are more connected than what people usually think. Perhaps because the word eudaimonic has taken a not different meaning than what was initially its own. So it's a very good point one you make.
Yeah,
But anyway, please take into account that I'm an economist, so this is a more philosophical question, which I know, okay, of course I know, but I'm not really an expert on these things, okay?
yeah, not a
So
problem. Yeah, most of us can only be an expert in a few areas, but happiness is a very philosophical concept, and the average man would really like to know, why should I even care about happiness?
yeah, it's the feeling, it's a feeling, it's a good feeling that you have. That's why you have to care.
Yeah,
That,
so we're going to get to your research, Eugenia. It's just that philosophically speaking, I am not, I like to research happiness. I enjoy your data, but I'm not invested in the idea of being happy.
well, I don't know if yeah, okay, that's a different. Okay, you are
Yeah.
saying that sometime pursuing eudaimonic happiness can generate unhappiness in at least in the short term. This is what you're saying.
Yes, yes. There are
Yeah,
actually studies
it's a
showing that when
possibility.
we
Yeah,
strive for happiness, sometimes we end up unhappy.
yeah, it's a possibility, and in you can put this in economics terms to say that happiness and utility are not exactly the same thing. Okay, utility is what make you make the utility is the function that determine your choice for an economist. Okay, happiness is a way to measure this utility, but it's not a perfect measure of utility happiness. Okay, it means that inside the utility function you don't have only the optimization of your eudaimonic happiness. You want also to optimize your eudaimonic happiness or whatever, and sometimes this action that make you optimizing this eudaimonic happiness may have a negative effect on eudaimonic happiness. Okay, this is the way an economist would explain what you are saying in a bit slightly more technical terms.
Yeah, yeah. Personally, I cannot impose my values on other people, but I think it's time to jettison the entire concept of happiness altogether.
I don't know. I mean, it's happiness is a, I don't know. It don't give any political meaning. I'm a researcher. Okay, I'm not
Yeah,
particularly.
yeah.
Neither a philosopher nor a politician, strictly speaking.
Yes,
For what I'm concerned, happiness is a signal that you have some your well-being is high. Okay, so which is good, and also happiness is an emotion that determines affect your economic behavior. This is what I'm saying. It's useful to measure happiness because it's a way to say to policymaker that they're doing the right things or the wrong things, whatever you want to say, or in any case to give a valuable information. But I would stop here, okay, as a scientist, as a researcher. I don't want to enter too much into politics, nor in philosophy, because I'm not,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
endowed technically to enter in a too deeply philosophical reasoning.
Yeah. But Eugenio, it appears that we're both agreeing because I like economics. I've read your research. So based on what I'm observing, to an extent, we do agree on the nation of happiness because Eugenio, you don't sound like someone who is overly invested in the concept of happiness either, like myself.
Yeah, I don't think
You're a
happiness is
rational
the only.
person.
I try to be rational. Yeah,
Exactly my
I try
point.
to control my like people normally do. Try to control their emotion to an extent.
Exactly. So people like me and you, we're actually the happy guys.
Okay, maybe satisfied. Okay, let's. I don't like too much you talk about happiness. Let's call it subjective well-being.
Yes,
Okay, in a bit.
subjective well-being. All right, so
Yeah,
we can
it's a
we
bit
can
less prosaic. Okay? It's a bit less prosaic, but it is a concept which it contains happiness, satisfaction,
yeah.
and these things. Okay, subjective well-being. It can be. It doesn't. Happiness is to be is a concept which is a bit too much linked
Yeah.
to emotions.
Yes, exactly. So Eugenio, question: can money buy happiness?
Um, a little, actually, yes, a little. And if you are very poor, if you are rich, it buys happiness to the extent that you are richer than somebody you use as a reference point. Okay, so we are. If you are very poor, yes, we value money because it gives us material well-being. You know, like food or sheltering or health, medicine, and so on. But once you achieve the level of some level of wealth, you are less careful to the level of money per se, but more to the level of money as compared to somebody else.
Okay then. And Eugenio, is the Easterling paradox still relevant?
I mean, Leicester Paras is important because it says some people have shown that it's not exactly precise in the sense that maybe there is a little bit of growth of happiness respect to GDP in some countries, at least, not in all of them. But the gist of it is still very relevant. It says that after some point, at least, happiness will not increase with GDP. After some point, if the country is very poor, yes, growing GDP makes people happier. Okay,
Yeah.
that's clear. But after at some level, this effect is much more uncertain. Yeah. So
Mm,
in this respect, Einstein paradox. In this respect, Einstein paradox is still valid.
Based on my observations, there is a relationship between economic freedom and happiness, and economic freedom is correlated with wealth. So I am assuming that economic freedom promotes happiness because as individuals, we like to exert autonomy. Am I correct?
Well, I think there is a correlation between freedom, individual freedom, and happiness. This, yes. Although, as everything in these things, we have to take everything with a grain of salt. Consider that you have a choice between two, three goods or two brand of goods, okay? Or you choose the one you like. And then another situation when instead of having two or three goods, brand of goods, you have 100. Well, there are research showing that when you have too much choice, you get less satisfied because you become more uncertain. You don't know if you did the right thing. You have regret. So yes, economic freedom or political freedom is correlated with happiness to an extent, although it's difficult to be precise about causation. But then you have to consider also the side effect due to the fact that too much freedom may generate a bit of uncertainty and feeling of anxiety and these things.
Well, if man is a slave to his passion, he cannot be free. So again, freedom for it to be feasible must be exercised properly. So
Oh
if
yeah,
if
sure,
if a
sure.
student has free time, he may teach himself how to play the piano or watch TV. And let me explain to you why I mentioned the second role. TV is actually quite important. I like history and philosophy, and most shows on TV reflect art, history, and philosophy. Therefore, if you are sensible, you will gain insight from watching TV and cartoons. So recently, I decided to attend the movie theater to watch cartoons because cartoons have immense philosophical content. Unlike a real movie, a cartoon is reflecting what is likely to occur or what we can only envision when we're at home in our bed sleeping. A show, an average movie with characters that are not cartoonish is a bit similar to life. So we know what is likely to occur, but cartoons tend to be more outlandish, and as such, they provide greater scope for philosophical analysis. So Bigfoot, that this is a particularly interesting cartoon because it plays on our emotions and and reminds us of the great conflict between religion and faith, etc. So a sensible person will find value in even activities we deem to be silly or just comedic.
Of course, yes, yeah, that's yeah, but so I don't understand the point now.
I was just responding to what we said earlier about happiness and finding meaning, and why some activities that may appear silly can actually provide value to sensible people.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
But
it's just my rumination. I
but
like.
then who are the sensible people? You see, we have to consider here this: who are the sensible people? How when a people is made sensible, is education, is intelligence, is who knows it? Huh? It's difficult, right?
Yeah, it's quite difficult, and
What makes somebody sensible? You see, it's a big question. You know, I don't have an answer, to be honest.
yeah, I wouldn't answer that question. As I said, I enjoy philosophical ruminations. I was just making a point for you and for the audience. It wasn't
Sure.
a question for us to respond to. But then you brought up a really good point. What makes someone insensible? They're highly educated people who have made some serious errors, and
Of
individuals
course.
we assume that are not very intelligent because of their level of education, yet their bank accounts are quite sizable. So
Sorry, I don't understand.
no, I was saying we said what determines sensibility, and I'm saying that there are some people who are sensible, but they make errors, and there are others who, because of their level of education, we may deem to not be very sensible,
Yeah.
yet they're successful.
Yeah, sure. It's a very, very complicated.
Yeah, very, very complicated. That's why I start this, and that's why I started this show. We pose interesting questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you also did a paper, and I would love to talk about it now. It's titled "National Happiness and Genetic Distance: A Cautious Exploration." J-
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
you may go ahead and tell us a little about it before I ask my questions.
Okay. First of all, we have to consider that this is a paper has been written 10 years ago, I think, or even more. It's been published.
2014.
Yeah, but it's been published in 14, but it started the work, I think, a few years before. Now, and genetics is going very fast recently. So 10 years is 100 years
Yeah.
in other disciplines. So it's going quick, quite fast. The analysis, the genetic analysis is proceeding very quick. In fact, we call the paper a cautious investigation. Okay, this is important. Now, what we found is that there is a correlation between genetic distance and happiness or subjective well-being, in the sense that countries which are genetically, if the closer you are genetically to country who declare themselves happy, the more is the country declared itself happy. Okay, so there is a correlation between genetic distance and happiness. These studies have been somehow also not replicated but comforted by then another paper which has been published more or less that period, 2016, where they use a much more sophisticated analysis, the so-called GWAS, based on genes, really. They really looked at people's genes and tried to see if there is a connection between some genetic mutation and their report, self-well-being report. And they found that there were a number of genes, 10 dozens of genes that more or less correlated with this report. So that there seems to be a link between genes and subjective well-being report. Now, both from my paper, which has been based on old-fashioned methodology, and this paper, which is much more sophisticated, based on GWAS. However, since that paper has been published, there has been criticism on that. So other papers have found that the this paper, which has been published on Science or Nature, if you don't remember, but this paper are based on analysis of 200,000 people, but are mostly European or European offspring. So it's a genetic sample which is a bit too biased toward Western world. It's not clear that this result will apply also if you use a sample which is not Western world. So all what I'm saying is this. Well, it seems so far there is a link between genetic makeup and happiness, although it's not huge, the link, okay? There is a link, but doesn't explain a huge amount of happiness. Yes, there is a link, maybe. So far, people have shown this, but there is still a lot of debate on that, okay? And it's not obvious that one day somebody come and say, show that this link is not true, is due to some kind of spurious correlation, which is due to the sample effect. But genetics at this stage is a very, very developing, fast developing discipline. Now, I say this, and I am passionate about that, because I want to warn people not to make too many inference about genetic studies, because since it's still in a phase which is developing, is very young, but the consequence can be very dangerous. So I would use always a bit of caution when talk about genetic studies.
All right, I agree with you that we should be cautious. However, we ought to be cautious based on the quality of the data. As a researcher, I care more about the methodology and the fruit of research than how people may respond to research. And
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree with you 100%. The only thing we have to remember is that genetics is a very fast developing, is a young discipline and is developing very fast, okay? So it might be that the methodology, what they know at the moment, is still, it can be much improved, okay? More than other discipline, other fields. That's what I want to say, okay?
yes.
We might be a bit too early to make bold claims.
Yes, but what I've been trying to get one of them, but they both seem to be busy. Enrico Hore and his
Yeah,
colleague.
yeah,
Yeah, they
yeah.
started this
I know.
research.
I know Enrico used actually the data that he actually built the data that we used on our paper on happiness. Okay, so I know perfectly well. But these are all passionate. Yeah.
Yeah, and serious researchers. So we're on this show, Eugene, we don't get into politics, but I take research seriously, and I am not interested in people who criticize research without having scientific knowledge or do so because of political motivations.
That's very bad. That's very bad. Yeah,
Yes,
I
yes.
hate people.
Yeah, and a lot of and Eugenia, as an economist, well, maybe you are unlikely to speak about it because you don't have that latitude. But I'm from a different position, so I can speak more boldly than you and some of your colleagues. And for the simpler reason is that with the advent of identity, we won't. I don't really want to get into it too much, but with the advent of identity politics and cancel culture, Europeans and white men like yourself, their views are not that valuable anymore. And as someone who's not white, I really have a problem with this new philosophy because it can actually reduce the quality of research and prevent people from conducting serious research. I don't like to speculate, and I recognize that during some of my interviews I have been speculating and the academics have been speculating. And it's not because that they're not bright, it's because we're unable to do quality research because of the political culture.
No, this is bad. It's clearly your only limit as a researcher should be the knowledge, the technological frontier. That should be your only limit. Okay, so you shouldn't be constrained by any political reasoning. The only thing you have to be careful is that whatever you say has a consequence. Okay,
Yes,
and then
that's just
to
so
say
life
that
is.
in the right way.
But back to the point of happiness and
Yes,
genetic
and that
distance.
you have to say this in the right way. Okay.
Yes, some studies are actually showing that in families, genes are related to happiness. So, for example, twins who lived in separate places where levels of happiness are similar. So I do agree with you that the study of the relationship between genetics and happiness is quite early, but we do have data and studies proving that the link could very well be possible. So it's not
Yeah,
something
yes.
I'm willing to rule out. I think it's something you and your colleagues should continue to investigate.
And we will do. And again, so far the best study I know is the one of this group of researchers. There is Dan Benjamin and other people, and it's been published, I think, on Science.
Yeah, what's
And
the
this
name
is
of that researcher?
okay. Let me just look because sorry, I very quickly. Uh,
Is it?
I think the easiest is for me to send you the link.
Yeah, you can just send me the link, but I'm wondering if it's the Navy.
Sorry, no, it's yeah. There is John. There is John involved as well. Yeah, the Neve is involved in the studies. Yeah. Anyway, I'll send you the link
Yes,
because
yes.
so far this is the best study I know. There might be newer that I don't know, but this is so far the best study. And Gian Emanuele was involved in this, like also Dan Benjamin, Philip Kerlinger, Davin Cesarini. It was a very large group of people. And you know why it was so large? Because they had to create a big consortium. Sorry, the one I haven't, there is a long list. I'll only mention the people I know who are more close
Yeah.
economists.
But
No, it was a big list because they had to build a huge, they had to pull fund together to create a very big data set. Because, if you want to do serious genetic analysis, you need hundreds of thousands of observation. Okay, so you don't do genetic analysis with 10,000 observation. No way. You have to go like more toward 1 million, 500,000 to do something which is more credible. And this is what they did. That's why it's a big group, because they pulled resources together in order to have so many people observed.
all right. So let's get back to the question of happiness. Eugenio, several studies have shown that relative status is a better predictor of happiness and well-being than
Yeah.
absolute status. Why is this so?
Because this is a reason. This is also is at the core of the difference between the neoclassical economics and behavioral economics. Okay, behavioral economics, which the main bulk of behavioral economics, which is called the prospect theory, it says this: utility function is not dependent on absolute values. Okay, but it's dependent on relative values. So if I feel myself rich, I don't feel it's not because I'm rich per se, but because I'm rich than a group of people that are considered my benchmark. Okay, and we reason like this. Our brain reason not in absolute values, but in relative values. Do you play any instrument?
No,
Yes.
no, sir.
Okay. In order to tune an instrument, only few people manage to tune an instrument without having an A starting. Okay. You need to tune an instrument by listening what is the right one. And then you are understanding if you are too high, too low, and you tune the instrument by listening to that. And it's exactly the way we are, we makes, we evaluate almost everything. We take a reference and we say, I'm better than that, I'm worse than that. Okay, and this is it's one specific case or one specific situation is wealth. I'm happy if I'm richer than a group of people that I consider as a reference. Okay, so this is the way we work. It's our brain rooted like this. And
Yes.
it will be a mistake to consider, if you consider, I think this is the main criticism that has been leveled by behavioral economists to neoclassical economists. The fact that the neoclassical economists have been naively considered the individual so rational to be able to make inference on the basis of the absolute level instead of their relative level. It's difficult if you think about it.
Exactly. But I asked that question, Eugenia, because as you said earlier, we need a benchmark. So $1 million is a lot of money because most people are not millionaires. So that part of the discourse is quite logical. But if I have 50 million, I'm objectively rich and relatively rich compared to others, but I'm not going to lose sleep because other people have 100 million. So so again, is happiness really intrinsic or extrinsic? Because if your goal is to become successful and you get that MBA, you start the business that's doing well, and as such you're in the lane to achieve further success, that's a positive. But why compare yourself to others? That's going to make you unhappy, because the truth
Yes,
is that most people may never achieve their goals.
you are absolutely right. You put the point. And this is also the reason why happiness doesn't grow too much respect to GDP, because everybody gets richer. And if the GDP grow, everybody gets richer. So every is people that gets rich as much as everybody else doesn't feel too much. It's exactly the point. You see, it's exactly the point. But anyway, I in this respect, I would also like to say something about aspiration that you more or less you were referring to. Think an economy or a country which doesn't let people aspire, okay, killed all people aspiration. Well, arguably, this country people might not be that unhappy because they don't have aspirations, so they don't achieve what they don't need to achieve what they don't have. Okay, but
Yeah.
now consider a country where people have a lot of aspiration. Some of them strive to get them, sometimes don't get them, sometimes get them, these things. And people don't get them, they feel miserable. Okay. Now, we are comparing two countries. One doesn't deliver aspiration, and maybe people are in average happier, but the other one that deliver aspiration, give people a chance to get something, but they don't manage. But some of them feel miserable. Which one of these two situations you prefer? Okay, and here we enter our judgment, our normative analysis, philosophical analysis, yeah, you know, you
Yeah,
know
but
what I mean. I hope.
yeah, I get your point clearly. So, Eugenio, at this point, we can talk about developing countries that score quite high on happiness, like Jamaica. So, before the conversation, before the interview, we're talking about Jamaica. So, Jamaica is seen as happy according to some studies. The Cato Institute Misery Index is very quantitative. So, on the Misery Index, Jamaica is not a big performer, but on others measures of happiness, it is viewed as a happy country, and we're going to talk about it now. I will give you my perspective and then you can respond. So
Of course.
aspirations are important. Jamaica is a developing country, and according to the World Bank, for years it recorded one of the slowest rates of growth in the entire world. So poverty is a problem. We have reduced poverty, but inequality still remains high, and subjective poverty is fairly high. In Jamaica, there is a community called Sufferers Heights. Quite ironic. The people know that they're poor and the community reflects their poverty. And there's a billboard saying Jamaica made for fun. So, in the context of poverty and low aspirations, I am assuming that over time, people embrace their failures. The life chances appear low. Therefore, it may not make much sense to strive for what you may never achieve. So, this could be one reason for the higher levels of happiness.
Okay, first of all, it's that part of the world people tend to declare themselves happy. Brazil is the same, but Central and Latin America. Obviously, can be also the effect of the weather. People in a good day tend to declare themselves happier than people in a bad day. Also can be a kind of culture. I know I love Latin American, Central American music, and this is music, happy music that try to induce some happiness in people, the rhythmic, the way it's done. So it could be part of cultural as well. But having said that, yes, it has to do. It has to do also. It could do also with aspiration. Okay, so if people have aspire very little, they are happy because they don't get much. They don't expect much. So in this respect, aspiration are quite bad. But it's true that aspiration, stress, all these negative feelings are there for a purpose. Okay, otherwise the selection, the natural selection would have killed this bad. If they were only inefficient, they would have killed this bad feeling. So stress as aspiration, regret, all these things have a very important role to play. And clearly, people in a situation where people have aspiration, also people are pushed to make innovation, technological innovation, um, to improve medicine, to improve our life, to improve our condition. So it's part of life, yeah. And that's why I'm saying a situation where people are completely happy because they don't have aspiration, well, it's not an ideal situation.
Yeah, Eugenia, you just said something really brilliant. And I would, if you did not research it in the past, I would love for you to take up the mantle. An academic from the Caribbean, he's a linguist. He wrote a book on play as a response to enslavement, something to this effect. And he argues that in the Caribbean, people are happy because the history is rather stressful and the realities are complicated. So if they become too serious, that could create psychological problems. So happiness, or what some would refer to as frivolity, is a response to residing in a stressful environment.
Well,
And
I don't think, to
before
be honest, yeah.
before your point about natural selection and the environment, I wasn't able to clearly see the link until a few seconds ago.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think it's this frivolism of, I don't know, to put it is a good way of portraying a sensation of happiness. No, I wouldn't say so. Yeah. Otherwise, you have to think about a lot of the Epicurean philosophy, as made by silly people, or a lot of philosophy, Eastern philosophy, that are looking for happiness in the sense of lack of passion, is considered a reaction of silly people, which is clearly not the case. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I think natural selection, natural selection uh, give us some negative feelings for a purpose. Not give us, I mean, sense allow us to keep some of the negative feelings for a purpose.
Yes, and so for example, in Jamaica, a talk show host now deceased would often say, if you don't laugh about the issues occurred in Jamaica, you will go mad. And Jamaicans have a saying, and I will just say it in English because more than likely our listeners don't understand Jamaican patois. Sometimes you have to discover the value in in silly events, or let me just phrase it differently. It goes like this: take bad things to make jokes, something like that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's
It's
what they call it in
important.
Jamaica.
Yeah, it's a way to being resilient. Okay, it's I know there is these things in also in the southern Italian culture. There is this idea that sometimes you have to be happy, even if you're aware that there is nothing to be happy about, but you have to take it happy to in order to go by to. But yeah, it's there also in the southern Italian culture. This idea.
Yeah, there are several parallels between Jamaica and southern Italy, but we may discuss them like in the last minute of the show. So, what we're going to get back to them eventually. Now, Eugenio, you have also done studies on the relationship between happiness and productivity, and I've seen studies saying that happy workers are productive workers. Is this true?
Well, we there are a lot of evidence showing this. We show this with a lab experiment. I've seen other paper based on real data, not laboratory data. So far, I have seen a sufficient amount of evidence saying that happy people tend to be more productive, more creative. Uh, Here again, as everything in life is alike in this relation to be completely linear. Okay, so it might be that after some point, if people are too happy, they don't. focus too much. So, or if complete lack of stress, it's good for productivity. This is probably unlucky. So as everything, we need to be cautious with these things. But so far, I've seen a lot of evidence showing that the happier people generate more and better output qualitatively.
Yes, but you're right. Moderation is the essence of life because there are some who hold the view that a certain level of stress is needed for productivity.
Yeah, some level of stress might be needed for productivity, because that's we get back to the discussion of aspiration. It's clearly that when you have an aspiration, you want to strive to get to the point where you want, and there is stress to get involved. So if there was not such a stress, you will not have the motivation to achieve that. So again, but I guess some people, psychologists say there is a positive stress and negative stress. So this could help also to understand the positive stress. It doesn't really generate sadness or low happiness. It also give you more motivations, which can be useful in this respect. But it's true that the mechanism through which happiness is feedback into productivity is likely to be very complex and needs a lot of research still.
Y-
At the moment, yeah, I think it needs a bit more research, need more understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, but Eugenio, do workers need to be happy to be productive?
Well, in average, the happier they are, the more productive they seem. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess that could be true to an extent, but then again, I'm a deontological nihilist, so I'm focused more on duty. As we established earlier, I'm not invested in the essence of happiness. So even if I am an unhappy worker, I need to meet my targets. So
I'm sure you can find your motivation on this. Obviously, yes. I'm talking about averages here.
yeah,
Okay.
but I'm very happy when I do the show. You can hear it in my voice.
Yeah. You're. If we do our job well, we are also smiling. I think we are doing our job better than otherwise.
Yeah. I'm really happy when I do
Yeah,
the show. No,
yeah,
Eugenio, you also did this paper titled Life Satisfaction, Income, and Personality. What is the relationship between personality and happiness? And you focus on neuroticism and
yeah.
extraversion. So tell us a little about the paper.
No, the main idea is this: that happiness, that money doesn't. The relation between money and happiness is very complex. Okay, it passes through the aspiration. So you are happy if you overshoot your aspiration. You are unhappy if you undershoot your aspiration. So that's the idea.
Yeah,
And this is what we say so far. And
yeah.
personality affect the way this relationship work. If you are neurotic, you are somebody who suffer a lot for losses. Okay, you tend to not to be particularly sensitive to losses. So somebody with neurotic personality, they tend to, if they undershoot their aspiration, they tend to get very depressed. Okay, so I think it is also, psychologists know this pretty well. Effectively, it could be that somebody also with a neurotic personality, knowing that is particularly sensitive to loss, will lower his aspiration or her aspiration to avoid to overshoot. Okay, if you know, this is a complex game that we play with ourselves. So this is neuroticism is an important trait that explains why our relationship between money and happiness. And the second, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Eugenia, that the research on neuroticism is quite complicated and baffling because on one hand, there are some studies linking it to depressive personalities. On the other hand, some studies link it to genius. Some studies link it to lower subjective well-being. It's just all very
No,
baffling.
but yeah, but I don't think it's inconsistent. Think about neuroticism as a sensitivity to losses. Okay, so you are neurotic if you really feel bad. The stick, the fact that you are making losses, you are not achieving what you want, and that can explain a lot. First of all, it can explain why neurotic tend to be depressed because it's very often that we don't achieve what we want, so it's normal that people feel too much, feel depressed. Neuroticism is also correlated with low subjective well-being. People are depressed, they tend to report low subjective well-being. But also, if you want, somebody neurotic is somebody that once he fix a goal, he really want to get there. Okay, so he has a very strong motivation to get there, because otherwise he would feel miserable. So, for example, genius, that they might have some big genius. Somebody who has a very big design. Okay, I want to discover, don't know, the gravitational wave. Has a very big motivation to do that, because if he goes too short of it, he will feel miserable. So this motivation push him farther or her farther on that respect. So all this link can be well explained by the fact that neuroticism is elasticity to losses, how we react to losses.
Yes, and sometimes neurotics tend to worry about very mundane activities. So I don't score highly on the measure, but in a particular instance, I may be neurotic. So for example, when I'm doing the show or about to embark on a very big venture, I often worry about what may go wrong.
Yeah, sure. It's being afraid of failures. Okay, it depends on what you consider a failure. Obviously, it depends on what's your goal are. Your goal can be very philosophical, can be very mundane, can be whatever. But as long as it's a goal, everything that falls short of that goal generate a lot of pain on neurotic people.
Yeah, I fear wasting time, but let's get back to the research, and I'm going to read a snippet for you to explain to the audience. Neuroticism increases the usually observed concavity of the relationship. Individuals with a higher neuroticism score score enjoy extra income more than those with a lower score if they are poorer, and enjoy extra income less if they are richer. What should we glean from this?
It means that again, neurotic is all determined by this feedback between income and aspiration. Okay, so that's all explain everything. If you fall, if your aspiration, if you overshoot on your aspiration, if you overshoot on your aspiration, and you are neurotic, well, you are not particularly happier, just a bit perhaps. If you undershoot on your aspiration and you are neurotic, well, you feel miserable. Okay, and that's basically what explain the mechanism, that the sentence that you just read from the paper. Neurotic is always somebody who minds to losses, suffer losses much more than what enjoys gains. Okay, this is neurotic. So that explains also the mechanism that you read. It's a scientific paper, so it's a bit technical. So
Yeah,
it's not
yeah,
strong, but that's the way I explain this thing.
yes. But Eugene, well, I won't say the word again because I have a slight lisp and a stutter, and I like to pronounce words properly. So I won't try to call it again. But
No one.
Eugenio, negative emotions do serve a purpose, don't they? So, for example, if we couldn't feel fear, more than likely we would all be dead.
Absolutely. This is what I said before. Natural selection, kept the negative emotion as long as alongside the positive one. So they have a very, very important purpose in terms of protecting ourselves, evolving, making good discoveries, improving our life. It was very key, negative emotion are as important as positive one for our life. Yeah.
Like I saw a question posed recently on a scientific website, and the question is, if humans are pro-social, then why do we experience social anxiety? And I was able to respond before reading the paper. If we were always excited, because of evolutionary pressures, we would be dead. Social anxiety forces us to think critically before approaching someone else or embarking on a new task. It's a way to measure risk.
Yes, it's a way, if we are too much pro-social, we might become a bit too naive, and other people might predate us. My predators might take advantage of this. Of course.
Yeah. No, we
Yeah,
can no, we can talk about your paper on Brexit. Was Brexit caused by the unhappy and the old?
yeah. The thing is this: what we found in this paper. Okay, first of all, this is a project which link happiness and voting behavior. I think I work with I and my co-authors were the first that clearly show this link that has been replicated. People are emotion, people self well-being affect voting behavior, but affect voting behavior on top of what objective variable affect. And now I'm going to Brexit. What we found is that our satisfaction with our financial situation, explain Brexit on top of the real situation, financial situation. Okay, so in a sense, if I am rich, but if I feel financially poor, if I feel, okay, even if I'm rich, I tend to vote for Brexit. So this paper showed that there is a psychological dimension on the vote. It was not only determined by objective condition, like to say the poor voted for Brexit because they thought that Brexit was kind of magic wand to solve their situation. Well, that's not only this, okay? There is also, on top of being poor, you have to feel poor. Or on top of being rich, not to vote for Brexit, against Brexit, you need to feel rich. Okay, so there was also this emotional situation on top of the real situation that push you, and it's a very strong correlation. It explains a lot, perhaps even more than the objective situation. So that's to say that very often voting is determined by emotion more than what is determined by real situations, and this is concerning.
Well, Eugenia, you are an economist. I don't need to remind you, but voters are rarely rational if we're using the objective metric of rationality. So people who are stoic or overly clinical, we assume that most voters are reflecting those personalities, but that's not really the case.
To an extent, yes, but to a large extent, no, they are not that rational. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've also discovered that though we often talk about being polite in politics, leaders who are impolite tend to do very well. And I've been recognizing this trend even before the rise of Trump and other characters like him. No,
Yes, being impolite is, it's appealing. It's appealing to people, feelings, emotions, and it turned out to be a very strong motivation for voting in a way rather than another. That's a bit sad, yeah.
yeah,
And also, the social media. This also, if you can, this also, it's related to the social media, to the effect of social media that pushes a lot toward this emphasizing the emotion. It's a multiplicator. It's a magnifier of the emotion. The social media.
and people like relatability. So whenever if I were to vote, the candidate should just be competent. I need to measure his history as a politician and a public servant or a businessman. But does he need to share my values well? I don't want a murderer. I don't want someone engaging in fraud. But beyond these big meta values, a political leader is not my friend. He's basically managing a business on my behalf.
Yeah,
But
but people don't feel like this way. You see, people feel like they want to see leadership. Um,
yeah, but
okay.
again, The conversation is interesting because there's usually a catch 22. They
Yeah.
want leaders who are decisive, but when they get a very abrasive and decisive leader, after a while they get quite annoyed, and they want someone who's more astute and diplomatic. So human nature is just really complicated.
Oh yeah, yeah. As much as you can get. Yeah, 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 yeah. Absolutely. You know, that's why I'm saying, if you do social science as an economist, a psychologist, sociologist, political scientist, you have to be always a bit modest, okay, in the way you present result. Okay, so I think this is the key.
So that's why you're being so modest on this show, despite the fact that you're quite famous in your profession.
I'm not sure I'm quite famous. Yeah, maybe a bit, but yeah, I tend to be very, down to earth and
Yeah, you're extremely modest.
okay.
Wouldn't assume that we're talking to a big name like yourself.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what to say.
Okay then. But a professor, you also produce a paper, COVID-19 and mental health deterioration by ethnicity and gender in the UK. What are your findings? Just briefly summarize them.
But the non-white British community had very high, uh, paid a high cost in terms of mental health, if you compare with the white British. So this is something now is known, but is known also thanks to our paper, which was one of the first that made this connection.
Yeah,
So yeah,
and why is this so?
yeah, we haven't really understood very well. I think it's still going on. This debate is still going on. It's a lot of things. First of all, it might be that the BAME community, if you allow me to call that way, which probably is not now entirely politically correct, but BAME community, it might be a bit more frontliner worker, and frontliner worker are more exposed to the risk of infection. That's a possibility. Another possibility is that, well, we were thinking that they tend to live in bigger family, okay, in a more crowded area, that's which increase the risk of Brexit. Sorry, the risk of COVID. In general, there people tend to be a bit more vulnerable because they are less rich. And for this reason, a shock like the COVID, the coronavirus, might have a stronger effect on them.
Yes, but Eugenio, I think that the results are a bit counterintuitive because poorer people are more exposed to stress and economic hardships. And as we discussed earlier, in countries like Jamaica and places in Latin America and southern Italy, because of the environment, individuals know how to respond to various stress and shocks. So basically, I think that this results a bit counterintuitive. Yes, COVID-19 is a reset, but historically, if you're accustomed to economic hardships and losing your job, or families dying, or your family members dying because of poverty, why would COVID produce such a great disparity? That this
Yeah,
is
it's
this
a,
is
it's an
basically my
interesting point.
question.
It's an interesting point. You may say, okay, fine, these are people who are more resilient because they're more used to hardship. But it could be that COVID represent a shock, which is so new. Okay, so something so new, uh, something unheard of before, which your past resilience, your habituation didn't work in the way it should. It did for other kind of shock, like becoming unemployed or getting sick with a normal, with a well-known illness. So it could be that is the fact that it's such a novel situation we are facing,
Yeah,
which
the response to COVID has an impact on mental health. So compared to the plague, COVID is not as deadly, but new reports on COVID are overwhelmingly negative. There's also the politics of COVID in the sense that individuals who are skeptical of anti-COVID measures are more likely to encounter social costs. So COVID is quite political, and if you don't fit within that framework, it may lead to mental problems.
Yeah, it is. COVID doesn't only affect our physical health, but affects our mental health, and arguably, this is an economically stronger effect than the physical one. Yeah, and the problem is that we don't know how long will go. It might be that people are affected in their mental health now, and then it will go away. But it might be that it will leave a scar, which will be there forever, and then generating an economic problem for the long run.
Yes, and then remember the negativity of COVID-19 is exacerbated by broader negative news on race relations. So this could
Yeah,
also be fueling mental health challenges.
absolutely. Yeah, the media exacerbate everything, and so this has an effect on our mental health. Yeah,
Yeah, and
I get it.
last, Eugenio, lastly, we can talk a little about the long-term study on happiness published by Harvard University, and the researchers conclude that relationships are a predictor of happiness, and they are interesting, and let me tell you why. A relationship can function as a substitute. Let's say, for example, you wanted to become a pride-winning economist or a billionaire. You don't achieve your goals, but your friends appreciate you and you love your family. So within this context, the relationship is becoming a substitute for your broken dreams. I'm not
Okay, first
saying,
of all,
yeah, let me
you're
continue.
not careful. Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
not saying that the findings are shocking, but maybe people are compensating elsewhere.
Well, there is a well-known relationship, in a sense of correlation between social relationship and subjective well-being. Okay, there is a well-known one. Although this is particularly difficult, the causality here is particularly difficult to ascertain because it might be that you have a personality who tend to be more friendly, but at the same time to declare yourself more happy, and the two things are not connected. Or there could be a reverse causality. Since you are happy, you tend to attract other people around you. You don't know. So this is clearly very difficult. But assuming that social relationship generate happiness, like you're saying, well, it's then you are saying yes. Could be that you feel with such a relationship whole, which are there for other things. For example, if
All
you're not
right.
particularly rich, no, if you're not particularly rich, you try to find relationship, human relationship, to fill this hole. Is this that you are saying?
Yeah, that's what exactly my point.
Well, yeah, it's a possibility, a theoretical possibility. I guess I don't see anything wrong with that.
Yeah. But before we go, Eugenio, would you describe yourself as happy?
Moderately satisfied. Yeah.
Okay, personally, as we said earlier, happiness is neither here nor there to me. I just set goals, achieve them, and I live my life.
Yeah, that's the good way of being happy. Yes, try
Yeah,
not to put the goals too high. Okay,
yeah.
not unrealistically high. This is a good advice.
Yeah, so Eugenio, it was a pleasure to speak to you, and
Okay,
I really enjoyed our conversation, so recommend it to your colleagues.
okay, thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
bye.
My
Yeah.
pleasure. My pleasure. Bye.